Hey, I'm Dr. Brian Sather, and today's sport ethics topic is exceptions and moral dilemmas. So earlier in my primary moral values talk, I talked about the importance of stating a principle. Wow, this came down recently. So when you have a principle, like I think I talked about, maybe a principle, you can state it in a way, usually it's best to state it in a negative. So I will not harm would be an example of maybe a stated principle. Is this a universal principle that should apply to all people? You know, you should not harm. So if you have a principle, what happens when you have situations that more than one principle are at odds? They directly conflict. And this would be, so this would be a situation where it's a dilemma. There are two right choices, or if you want to look at it, there are two wrong choices. You're going to have an element, no matter what choice you make, there is going to be a principle that is violated. So a classic example of that would be Heinz dilemma. So if you shouldn't be doing harm, Heinz dilemma, he has a wife who needs a medication that keeps her alive, and yet all the drugstores are closed and he needs to get that medication for her, and so he's forced with the decision to go break into the building and steal. So if stealing is immoral, yet he has an obligation to keep someone alive, he's going to be breaking one of those principles. So Heinz dilemma, what's the right choice there? So let's take a sports example, kind of like a Heinz dilemma of sport, if you want to think of it that way. You have volleyball player who goes up to block a spike, and the ball tips off of her or his fingers and goes out of bounds. So it should be the other team's point. So in volleyball, that's kind of hard to tell for a referee. So if a referee doesn't see it or hear it and doesn't make the call, you as a player, should you volunteer up that yes, it tipped my fingers? Because after all, don't we want a fair outcome? The best person wins. And if you're deceitful, you have a, but you also have a responsibility to, try to win the game. So, what's the decision if you're forced with that? Oh, this steep climb. Oh, a little bit off. I don't know if that's a climb that I could make with my regular mountain bike. This is an e-bike. Tons of fun. Anyway, so we have those situations where a dilemma exists. And yeah, see, e-bikes, it's hard fitness wise. It's not cheating. Some people claim e-bikes are cheating. So the thing is, you don't want to just make exceptions wildly to make exceptions. If you can uphold both principles, you should. Otherwise, you're constantly making exceptions. You start down the path of a slippery slope. Well, I'm hitting pockets of cold. Look at this, there's frost right there. It wasn't too cold back there, but thing I got my winter like gloves on. So we have situations that you absolutely have to make one choice. You're forced. That's your moral dilemma. So how do you do that yet remain ethical? If there's no other alternative to uphold both principles, you have to break one. That's where stacking comes into play. Stacking, you would have an order of importance to moral principles. Like you might say, doing harm, that's the ultimate principle, not doing harm. So I'm gonna break in, steal for my wife, and save her life. So you've stacked them. You've created a one principle that's more important than the other. So that's how you can go through a moral dilemma and yet maintain standards of ethics, and not just wildly make exceptions anytime you want. So for example, in the volleyball example, you could admit to it, and it still doesn't prohibit you necessarily from winning the game, and it ensures there's an outcome. But I don't want to lead you on like that's we're gonna have to come to a decision on what the right thing to do is in a situation like that. In sport, is it okay to be deceitful? Because after all, isn't that what you do when you fake someone out and have a trick play or something? Or you fake one way and go the other way? Isn't that deceit? I don't know, maybe not. So think about that. That's moral dilemmas. And the important thing though is to establish what those universal principles are, and have that really clear in your mind so you know how to act in a certain situation, and it's not just on a whim. You have it well thought out what your values are, and those moral values should be things that add character to what you do. GoPro, stop recording.